Hello everyone, and welcome back to my read-through of the books in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist. I'm G, and this is going to be the last episode of this. It's a little bittersweet after all of the books in Uru all put together. There's so very many. But either way, this is the last one. So let's get started. King Lemachal took the throne in 3908 at the age of 100. Lemachal had been fairly involved in the minor guild of actors, although it was said that what especially interested Lemachal was illusion. Up to that point, there had been a few different magic clubs, although nothing unofficial. So in 3961, Lemachal, with quite a bit of trouble, forced the establishment of the minor guild of illusionists. It was not a guild that most found necessary, but Lemachal argued that neither was the guild of actors, painters, or musicians. It was entertainment, of which illusion was a valid form, taken from a speech to the council arguing for the establishment of the guild. Ironically, it was later discovered that the establishment of the guild was an illusion in itself. While the guild was debated, Lemachal established an undercover intelligence force to keep track on the more dangerous factions and subgroups of Denis. Lemachal did not need council approval to establish the guilds. Though many kings preferred council approval, it was said later that Lemachal purposely wanted the debates to take place as a distraction. They were a highly secretive group, of which the public had little or no knowledge until years later. And so with the confirmation of the Guild of Illusions, the Reliima, literally translated the Unseen, were also established. Though the previous few kings had been fairly focused on Denis and expanding their own culture and territory, Lemachal again looked toward the outside cultures in a matter that had not been seen since Hinash. In 3975, he remarried, as his first wife had passed away at a young age, to an outsider. Unlike Hinash, who had also married an outsider, Lemachal and his new wife bore a son, his first 20 years later, in 3995, and another one in 4014. For the first time, the Denis were truly confronted with their views on outside cultures, and the arguments were said to have started as soon as Lemachal's son was born, as to whether or not he would be allowed to someday rule as king. Unfortunately, though Lemachal led quite a few efforts to supply better lives for other cultures, along with freer trade and sharing of resources with other ages, the remaining years of his reign were dominated by whether or not his son would be allowed to reign. To Lemachal's credit, though he could have forced his will concerning his son upon his people, he never did. If his son were to eventually reign, he said, it will only be over a people who want him to. In 4030, the council decided that a king had to be of pure Denis blood. Lemachal signed the decision into law the following year. When he died in 4083, he left the throne to the youngest child of his cousin, whose mother had been the younger sister of his father Kedri. King Ishak took the throne in 4083 at the age of 85. His grandmother had been Shama, and of Ishak it was often said that he ran his throne almost exactly as his uncle Kedri had. He was another of the people's kings, and refused to separate himself from his people or view himself as a higher level than those he served. It seems a king with such an attitude was hard to not like, and his popularity was close to that of Kedri's. Like Lemachal, he focused on the involvement of non-Denis and their importance to the Denis culture and expansion. His powerful words of equality between the Denis and non-Denis were truly put to the test in 4103. Ishak and his wife had been touring a food facility run by natives on the age of Yimas. As it turns out, the party was ambushed, and Ishak's wife was taken by a group of natives who managed, using Denis linking books, to easily escape before Ishak or his guards could react. Taken from city guard records. As word leaked out of the event, the words animals, uncivilized, and primitive were used to describe those of the other worlds in a way that had not been used since the Pento War. Ishak fought the people's new perceptions and argued that not all outside cultures should be judged on a few radicals. His words, however, were seen as empty by much of the public as he waited for word on his wife. Word finally came. The Yimas wanted their own worlds to rule, as they felt the Denis ruled them. They had specific demands for the kind of worlds, many of which were impossible, as they had no concept of the art of writing. Taken from transcripts of Grandmaster Jackins of the Guild of Writers speak to Ishak. Unless they were given the 3 worlds they demanded, Ishak's wife was to be executed. Many viewed Ishak as a faithful study of history, and in particular, the Pento War. Because of his knowledge of history and his belief in the integrity of the Yimas, he was fairly convinced that it was not the Yimas who wanted the books, but some small faction of Denis who was directing them. Rumors say that he was even fairly convinced of the particular faction that was doing it. As was the case with the Pento War, it had not been the Pento who were to blame, but the judges who had wrongly sought power. Given Ishak's apparent distrust of some within his own people, more than those who were not Denis, he had been a strong supporter of the Reliima. As it turned out, it was their information that saved him. There were a number of groups who felt as though Denis should be completely sealed from the other cultures. One in particular had been especially vocal in their opinion. Especially while Ishak's wife had been held captive, using the tragedy to further their own cause. Depending on source, two different groups are credited with the kidnapping, although Reliima records indicate that it was a group known as the Blood of Yavo. Other records indicate it was a group known as the Light of Denis. It was to this group Ishak apparently directed the Reliima, ordering them to uncover any information they could. 3 days later, Ishak sent out word that he had no intention of giving the Yimos the world they had asked for. Hours later, Reliima informants followed two members of the faction Ishak had suspected to an illegal age where his wife was imprisoned. Once the public received word they had once again been their own people directing the operation, records indicate that they were greatly dismayed. Plans were uncovered that indicated the faction was to kill his wife no matter whether the ages were given or not, to only prove further that outsiders could not be trusted. In fact, it seems as though the public was quickly learning that it was their own blood who could not be trusted. As Rhinaref and the Great King had often said, it was a great power they had been entrusted with, and it is our own hearts that must be watched, a temptation too great to be resisted without strict rules or willing hearts. Taken from Book 1 of the Great King. As a result, there was a great push for more strict guidelines for interactions with other ages, as well as rules for the ages themselves. They sought the rules not because the other cultures were savages, but because our own culture could not be trusted to deal with them honorably. From How They Came, a detailed look at what started the Mi-Dis War by Jamin, written in 7201. Ishak passed away in 4291 at the age of 293, leaving the debates to his firstborn son. King Loshemanesh took the throne in 4291 at the age of 123. Though Loshemanesh's reign was relatively short, it is believed he made the most of the years he was given. Loshemanesh had seen firsthand the effects of too much interaction with other cultures, and because of that held firmly to his views, disagreeing with what was becoming the majority view in Denis. He often pointed out, as his father also had, that before the Pento War, strict regulations had existed on interaction with other cultures, and it did nothing to stop the judges from their writings. Loshemanesh himself stated, "Those who wish to take advantage of outside ages and people who cannot be stopped must first be listened to within Denis, not forced to take such extreme measures. When extreme measures are taken, the consequences must be increased." Taken from a public speech explaining his signing of the laws. In 4305, law was passed stating that creation or trading of illicit ages was punishable by permanent imprisonment on solitary prison ages, a fate that some said was worse than death. In 4307, Loshemanesh passed, barely, another law stating that any Denis who coerced an outsider to commit a crime, no matter what the crime, was also punishable by permanent imprisonment. While the laws were passed, Loshemanesh encouraged further interaction with the other cultures, while continuing to argue interaction itself was not the problem. However, it seems as though many failed to see his stance and still pushed for stricter measures on the Guild of Writers and a complete sealing off of any interaction with outsiders. In 4334, the Age of Trosses, a major mining age, was halfway destroyed because of the mistake of a native running Denis machines that had been established there. Families were forced to evacuate, and in one particularly odd case, supposedly a child was born while the mother had been linking from Trosses back to Denis. Regardless, the destruction of the age was another cause of argument for those who wished to seal themselves off, and a case that Loshemanesh argued could have happened regardless of who was running the machine. Sadly, in 4438, Loshemanesh was assassinated by the same faction who had kidnapped his mother years earlier, making his life an example of what he had often preached. It was the Denis who had to change. If they did not, he had argued, problems would always exist, whether or not outsiders were involved. He left the throne to the first son of his younger brother, as he had no children of his own. King Ji took the throne in 4438 at the very young age of 36. The combination of an apparently immature and weak king, along with the tension that was growing within Denis over the outsiders and religious principles, went down in history as a bad one. At the start of his reign, government records say Ji was overtaken with his new palace life and the luxuries it afforded him. He seemed much more concerned with what kind of food he would be served for breakfast than whether or not Denis should pull back all of its people who were living in outside ages, as some were suggesting, wrote one anonymous author. Because of his apparent lack of concern over the real issues, it was the Grand Masters who quickly became the most frustrated with Ji. It was said by a few Grand Masters in private journals that Ji would wholeheartedly agree with them while they presented their strategies and plans, and then agree with their challenges an hour later. The indecision by Ji made for little evidence of progress and complete frustration for most of Denis. For the first time in many years, the signs of division began to appear as they had during the 2500s. The once unified religious beliefs showed signs of splitting. The once unified classes began to separate into rich and poor, and the once confident rulers of worlds began to wonder whether they could rule even themselves. Adding to the confusion were the words of the Watcher. The Watcher, as he had come to be called, was the child who had been born between ages, and now, rumor said, had the ability to see beyond time, past, present, and future. In 4500 he wrote Words, a 625-line volume describing his visions of Denis. Much of the book dealt with the great destruction of Denis that would one day occur, and the signs that would come with that destruction. Many claimed that the book was seizing upon the chaos of the day and dismissed it as rubbish, while others seemed to be rather intrigued. Also in 4500, Guildmaster Kenaf of the Guild of Legislators brought forth a proposal that would allow the use of private education, separate from the guilds. Although many seemed frightened of the idea, an education in the guilds had always been thought of as inseparable, as spoken by Kenaf during debates to the council in 4500. The proposal itself eventually passed by a slim margin. It seems private education never really received near the admiration and respect from the public, and thus never truly succeeded. G seemingly had little to say on the proposal one way or the other. G was married in 4502 to Milan, a woman who had been married 3 previous times. It was G's first, and the prophetess advising him had strongly spoken against it. The marriage lasted 25 years before ending, and marked the first time any king had divorced one of his wives. G remarried in 4565 to a woman 100 years younger, something culturally accepted. It was the rumors that she was the daughter of the Watcher that created problems. She denied the claims, but did show quite a bit of interest in his writings and convinced G to do the same. The marriage lasted until 4645, when G's wife vanished. Some said outsiders had taken her, since nothing had been resolved concerning them, common among those still wanting more strict guidelines pertaining to outside involvement. Others said G had murdered her. One of G's gardeners claimed he witnessed the murder with his own eyes. And others said she had returned to her father, the Watcher, even though the Watcher died in 4606. Though the Watcher was believed to have died in 4606, there were numerous rumors of people claiming to have seen him and talked to him. G's final wife was one of his own prophetesses he had sought for advice, marking another first for a king. The two were married until G's death in 4692. He left the throne to the third son of a close friend. He was 290 years old. To sum up G's reign, one author wrote, "There was a collective sigh of relief throughout the cavern on the day he finally left us," taken from a recently discovered manuscript that was apparently never published. King Yablashan took the throne in 4843 at the age of 109. Though most commentaries say that he held to the same beliefs as his father, it seems he was not nearly as strong and thus did not carry the level of respect that his father had, a character trait that some of the more violent factions preyed upon. Demoth had managed to refocus the Denis to a large part. However, the few factions who still desired to make their case were able to make Yablashan's reign an unpleasant one. In 4865, the Blood of Yavo kidnapped Yablashan's first son from the Guild of Chemists. In a letter, the factions stated they would kill the king's son if one of their own leaders was not released. Goshen had been imprisoned in a prison book 50 years earlier by Demoth. Yablashan ordered the Reliima to find his son, but they were apparently unable to do so. Later, it was discovered that a key member of the Reliima had joined the Blood of Yavo and was aiding them. Feeling forced, Yablashan gave in to the demands and released the prisoner they had asked for. The body of his son appeared on the steps of the palace a few days later. The death of Yablashan's son, along with newfound evidences of a mole within the Reliima, further separated Denis into two sides. Those who wished to end outside intervention were becoming stronger, publicly raising their cause almost daily. Those who followed the majority were growing angrier and less tolerable of those who did not. As a result, there is little doubt that there were very few Denis left who fell into the middle ground. There were even less, including Yablashan, who could bridge the two sides. From How They Came, a detailed look at what started the Mie-Dis War, by Jaman, written in 7201. Yablashan, in an apparent attempt to divert his people's attention from the brewing wars, decided in 4889 to announce remodels for all of the 18 major guilds. It was the first of its kind since the Denis had been founded and warmly embraced by the guilds. Under the announcement, Yablashan changed some of the original restrictions of Rhinareth, offering the guilds more liberty in the structures they could build. In 4901, Yablashan stated his plans for a new common library located directly within the Vaman district of Denis, a middle-class district. In 4910, he announced plans for a new park to be built on Neref Island. In 4914, 3 new recreation ages were placed within the park as gifts from the Guild of Writers in order to celebrate the completion of their new guild. The diversions seemed to do their job until 4954, when an explosion occurred on the age of Mayanas. Mayanas was well known for its production of mining machinery, killing 400 outsiders and 78 Denis. It was apparently the result of a bad combination of gases, one that Denis had brought with them, and the other already in existence on Mayanas. Another push was begun to seal themselves from outside influence. The Reliima, who were usually counted on in these situations, apparently had no information as to the facts of the explosion. They were still apparently in the midst of their own chaos, trying to discover the mole. There were some who thought the explosion had been a setup, but it could not be proven. From Revealing the Unseen, written by Becherin in 5999. In 5043, Yablashan placed a man by the name of Faresh in charge of the Guild of Illusionists. His first mission, as ordered by Yablashan himself, was to find whoever was destroying the Reliima's ability to gain knowledge. Though most believe that Faresh had been more interested in actual illusions than the unseen, he was also known as an extremely intelligent man and immediately put into action a plan to clean up the Reliima. He also began construction of a house on one of the private islands of the cavern that blatantly demonstrated his love for illusions. Yablashan died in 5081 at the age of 347. He never had any other children after his son was killed, and left the throne to his youngest brother-in-law, his younger sister's husband. King Emen took the throne in 5081 at the age of 150. 2 years after his coronation, 2 members of the Reliima mysteriously disappeared and were never seen of again. This was not public information in around 6000, however the discovery of the moles was well known in the higher circles of government. Faresh became a silent hero in the key members of the government, and the factions were again quieted, knowing they were being watched. Key members of the government were often seen at parties taking place in Faresh's mansion, and rumors of puzzle rooms and secret halls grew through the city. The house itself, located on Katha Island, was becoming one of the more talked about buildings in the entire cavern. From Haunted by Her Cries. In 5093, 2 members of a cult known as Wundni were proven guilty for the explosion that had occurred years earlier on Mayanas. Both were permanently imprisoned. At the same time, Emen, along with a guild of caterers, announced the completion of 2 new food ages, one of which was run solely by outsiders and produced new food sources that had never been tasted in Dni before. Shimas and Hereas became known for a large variety of fruits and vegetables that naturally grew on each. The popularity of Faresh's mansion caused others, mainly elite, to request permission to build on the many islands that surrounded the city proper. In 5095, Emen decided to sell many of the islands that up to that point had been government property. Records indicate the sale of over 23 of the islands in 1 year to private citizens who could afford their heavy price tag. In 5102, disaster hit the family of Faresh in the mysterious death of his daughter. Official city guard records said she awoke in the middle of the night, claiming to see spirits, and jumped from her bedroom window to her death. Rumors abounded as to the true cause. Some thought the house was haunted, while others, mainly government, thought she might have been a target of factions. From Haunted by Her Cries, written by Hagen in 5120. Perhaps the most damaging rumors dealt with the Watcher. In words, he had described similar events taking place, and such a public event caused many to begin to study his words again. Words has numerous references to dreams and mourning in the streets, which many interpreted to describe the death of Faresh's daughter. It was the beginning of philosophical chaos yet again. Faresh left the house a year after the death of his daughter, claiming to be unable to live with the memories of his daughter. The house was given completely, although no one knew it at the time, to the Reliima. Rumors of dark shadows in windows and boats silently rowing toward the island fueled the idea the house was haunted. It appears that after the Reliima controlled the house, Emen himself often made visits, recommending a number of renovations, tunnels, etc., that he thought would aid them in their cause. In 5202, a public ferry system was approved by Emen, offering much more frequent access between the island, the city proper, and the surrounding smaller islands. One of those islands Emen gave to the minor guild of artists, musicians, and actors, who turned it into a cultural center. In later years, the center often hosted outside concerts, plays, etc. on the water. 4 years before Emen's death, the Guild of Stonemasons announced Deratheni. Deratheni was a lightweight stone which proved to be extremely strong. The substance had been produced in a laboratory for the first time, and was the start of much improved construction techniques. Emen died in 5240 at the age of 309, leaving the throne to his firstborn son. King Adesh. Adesh took the throne in 5549 at the age of 49. Though Adesh was young, it was also said he was mature for his age and took quite a bit of advice from the prophetess Trisari, who had also served his uncle. Adesh was apparently a religious man, but not an especially accepting man. The prophet Gish arrived on the scene in 5574 and began preaching, similar to what Tevar had done years earlier. Unlike Tevar, Gish praised the words of Yavo, but nothing else. The great king, he said, was a farce, as was Tevar. He denounced his people for claiming that Tagon was more important than following Yavo's commands. The word literally means to love with the mind, implying having a close personal knowledge of the other person, or in certain case, Yavo. It had been taught that in order to gain access into the perfect age, Yavo only required such a relationship and nothing else. He declared that Tevar and the Great King had used Tagon as an excuse to do what they wanted, and it was time to focus on Yavo's commands again. One of them, he added, was no interaction with the outsiders. From Yavo alone, written by Gish. Though Gish was not the first to say such things, for some reason the public came in droves to listen to him, making him an extremely popular figure. Taken from the private journals of Trisari. Adesh denounced Gish's words at every level and arrested him multiple times, and by such actions only encouraged Gish, arguably making his impact upon the society even larger than what it otherwise would have been. Gish continued his preaching until, in an apparent fit of rage, Adesh ordered the Reliima to kill him. Many think it was in fact Trisari who convinced Adesh to make the order. It was said later the decision was most likely the worst of his reign, from The Followers written by Manesh. The Reliima succeeded in their mission in 5675. There was extreme outrage at the king as well as the official church. Exactly as Gish had taught, Adesh had justified killing a man strictly against the laws of Yavo because he felt there was something more important that was justified because of Tagon. Gish became a martyr, and those who followed him increased. Adesh made attempts to draw his people back, but it was too late. There were apparently very few people, even ardent followers of the Great King, who could agree with his decision. In fact, it was rumored that it was one of Adesh's close advisors who killed him in 5701 at the young age of 201. The throne was left to his firstborn son, Lanaran. King Lanaran. Lanaran took the throne in 5701 at the age of 98. Lanaran had not been close to his father and as a result was not much like him. It was rumored that it was because of Lanaran that Adesh's own advisor had killed Adesh. They knew Lanaran would give the people what they wanted. Lanaran immediately denounced the actions of his father in killing Gish and informed the public of the existence of the Reliima, their involvement in the death of Gish, and the promise to rid them from all governmental activities. The announcement was a shock to the public and a huge blow to those who had served the Reliima. Most ended up living in hidden private ages, while a few were murdered after their years of service to the government. From Revealing the Unseen, written by Besharen in 5999. The loss of the Reliima again gave the factions hope that they would be able to carry out their demonstrations again. However, Lanaran also promised to rid outsider involvement, meaning the factions had no need for such acts. It's believed that the promise was not one that Lanaran necessarily meant to keep, but instead one he intended to pretend he was trying to meet to keep the factions happy. He also believed wholeheartedly in the plan to build a tunnel to the island and was able to push it through in 5714, as Ma'emen had not been able to. While Stonetooth was busy digging, Lanaran promised that its next task would be to continue expansion by the Ashemen district with eventual plans to create new residential and cultural districts. Lanaran also ordered the major guilds to begin work on replacing all ages that required outsider involvement. He demanded ages that would carry out the same task but without outside involvement. Most guild masters knew the plan would take years and years, and though they did not agree with it, agreed to attempt it. From the private journals of Grandmaster Heman of the Guild of Legislators. In 5721, new techniques were developed to incorporate structural reinforcement in extrusion-based constructions, some that would aid construction of the district Lanaran had promised. In 5734, the tunnel connecting the island with the city proper was cancelled. Stonetooth had been working on it for over 20 years, but the guildmasters, who were already required by Lanaran to replace a huge number of ages, were not about to connect their homes on the island with the cities proper. From The Lost Tunnel written by Lashem in 6034. Lanaran agreed, as there were further concerns that such construction could affect the lake level or even the algae within the lake. The environmental damage claimed by Lanaran and Dini environmentalists was never proven. Most agree it was an easy way out for Lanaran, who then did not have to admit he was bullied by the Grandmasters who lived on the island. Instead, Stonetooth was ordered to begin clearing out more space next to the Eshemen district. In 5856, construction was begun on the new Lanaran district. Stonetooth was ordered to begin further exploration of the cavern by way of new tunnels. In 5902, the guilds announced 4 new ages to replace some of those being used by outsiders. 3 of the ages were food ages, while the 4th was meant to replace one of the major manufacturing ages. In reality, none of them were ever used to the extent the ages they were replacing had been used. The announcement meant little except to have the factions believe that eventually outside involvement would be finished. 5903 marked the first inhabitants of the Lanaran district, mostly manual laborers who worked in the adjoining Ashemen. The Reliima were officially finished with their work in 5986. The announcement was fairly quiet, as most of their work had ceased long before that. In 5999, Lanaran passed away at the very old age of 396. He left the throne to his 5th and youngest son. King Jauron. took the throne in 6284 at the age of 83. He was apparently much like his father, more interested in keeping everyone happy than declaring one side of the debates concerning philosophy, advancement, or outside involvement, right or wrong. As a result, though the people were satisfied, there was further division among them. The elite and poor became more divided, and though there was quite a bit of new construction and renovation in both the elite and poor districts, there was nothing done to join the two. For some reason, Geron was obsessed with expansion and exploration of the cavern. There were rumors his obsession stemmed from Watcher prophecies. One in particular stated, "Because of tunnels, Denis has changed forever." Geron never said what drove him, but throughout his reign he pushed the Guild of Miners, Mechanists, Engineers, and Surveyors to work together to create new drills and machinery. He had great plans to widen the Rudena Passage, which when opened would allow for further expansion. In 6430, the announcement came. Rockbiter and the Burrower were both christened in a great ceremony and then immediately put to work. Stone Tooth and Stone Eater were used for further city expansion. The once violent factions that had existed were, for the most part, dissolving. Many of their members were seemingly beginning to call themselves followers of Yavo, as Gish had been. Although they did not support outside involvement, they believed it was best to obey Yavo and hope for a peaceful solution. Though Geron carried out a few meetings with the factions, the dissolution of the factions had little to do with his policies or leadership. Regardless, he was able to focus on mining efforts without consequences. It was a luxury the previous kings had not been afforded, and the main reason some of the greatest expansion in Denis history began under Geron. Geron himself died in 6498 at the age of 297. Though he did see the completion of the expansion of the Rudena Passage, he never saw the new areas to which the passage led. He left the throne to his third son. King Rikuth took the throne in 6498 at the age of 56. Though young, he had two older brothers and a sister, with whom it was said he often consulted. They each understood the logic of giving the throne to the youngest son. It guaranteed more time on the throne for the individual, and worked well with their younger brother, as no other family had done previously. Years later, it would be a forceful argument for council ruling. Rikuth's first major decision came in 6510 when a new cavern was found by expeditions led by Rockbiter and the Burrower. There were calls to expand the city, but Rikuth was apparently unconvinced it was a smart plan. His older brother, who happened to be a guildmaster of the Guild of Surveyors, agreed to study the cavern extensively, and Rikuth promised to make a decision upon reading results of the city. In the meantime, Rikuth married in 6556 to a woman named Hisha. Her father was a Grandmaster of the Guild of Chemists and a strong believer in Gish and the fallacy of the Great King. Though Hisha had some influence on Rikuth, he continued in the tradition of his father, never publicly stating his views on philosophy. However, she had much more influence on the three sons that they would eventually have together, including the youngest, Karath. It was her influence that would change Denis forever. From The Last King, written by Yamas in 7002. In 6601, extremely detailed reports, structural analysis, water supplies, rock type, came back informing Rikuth that though the newly discovered cavern was habitable, it would be very expensive to build in. Rikuth made the decision, after conferring with his advisors, that Stone Tooth, along with the new Rockbiter, should begin digging out more of the city proper into the cavern wall for expansion, while Burrower and Stone Eater would continue to tunnel past the cavern. In 6676, Rikuth met with leaders to discuss the involvement of outsiders. Though there had been no major incidents for hundreds of years, it was still an issue to be discussed. In the meetings, it became apparent that though Rikuth understood the reasons for wishing to close down interaction with outsiders, it was a ridiculous thought. Their contribution to Denis culture, art, construction, technology, and resources was immeasurable. Unless there were grand reasons not to, there was no way, he argued, that he would ever force strict resolutions regarding the outsiders. From How They Came, a detailed look at what started the Mi-Dis War, by Jamin, written in 7201. In his older years, it appears as though Rikuth became tired of Hisha and her views and opinions. She was expelled from the palace along with Karath in 6700. It was well known that Karath was a model of his mother's thoughts, and Rikuth could hardly stand him. From The Last King, written by Yamas in 7002. Though Rikuth had chosen an older brother of Karath to be king, his thoughts were changed. As the legends told, Rikuth was on his own deathbed staring out towards the arch, and he saw his son Karath sailing through it. He was riding a boat in the shape of a massive lizard, standing proudly on its prow, and had come home to announce the death of his mother. As he sailed through the arch, Rikuth apparently felt the hand of Yavo, directing him to make Karath the next king of Denis. By the end of Rikuth's reign, the city was larger than ever, the classes were more divided than ever, and the religious beliefs were as divided as ever. Though there were not a large variety of beliefs, there was no clear majority of people who believed any one thing. Rikuth passed away in 6731 at the age of 289, leaving the throne to his third son, Karath. He left him a city that was larger than it had ever been and fairly evenly divided in its views of the future. And that is it for all of the books in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist. Unless there are some secret ones that I'm not aware of, that is the end. And this has been a wild journey learning about all the different parts of the history of Denis, all the different things that they went through. There's so much more in the books than was ever delved into in the actual game itself. It's wild, honestly, it's wild. But overall, I'm glad that I read them, and I'm glad that you were here to read them with me. So thank you all so much for following my read-through of the books in Uru, Ages Beyond Mist. And I'll see you in the next episode. Bye now!